Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit down.
Citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of April 10th. And I'm still Michael James, and I'm here with Mike Miller, someone who is a pretty legendary community organizer. I think that, who was it? That guy named Howard Zinn said Mike Miller has become known as one of the most experienced community organizers in the nation. And when I was at Berkeley from 64 to 66, getting involved with STS and going into West Oakland as a community organizer, Mike's was a name I heard. And I'm really glad to finally get him on the show. So good day to you, Mike Miller in San Francisco.
Good to see you, Mike James in Chicago. You asked a little while ago about how I got into all of this. And really, it was part of my mother's milk. My parents were left-wingers, and rebellion for me in high school was getting into junior achievement, which was high school kids who thought they might become business people. So I went the opposite way than most rebellions went, but that didn't last very long. I got to Berkeley, UC Berkeley in 54, and it was still the tail end of the McCarthy era. It was pretty quiet on the campus. But I got active in the University YMCA, which was a little bastion of independence at Cal. So we did very tame civil rights and civil liberties things. Nothing remotely resembling direct action. It was all quiet negotiations with administrators in the university. And then I ran for student government office. And I got elected. I got elected as what was called rep at large. And a guy arrived at Berkeley, I think in 56, by the name of Fritjof Tygeson. Fritjof was an older guy, a veteran, and called himself a socialist. And he brought with him to Berkeley the idea of a campus political party. So that sounded kind of interesting, and I got involved in that, and it was called TASK, Toward an Active Student Community. TASK ran a slate of candidates for office, but it made the mistake of imposing upon them a pledge that was copied from the British Labour Party. If TASK wanted to recall you, you had to resign. Well, that wreaked havoc with us in the campus newspaper, and turnout didn't increase in the election, and we didn't do very well. So TASK kind of became dormant. I was still a rep at large, but I was antsy. And, the Martin Luther King's Montgomery bus boycott was 55, so that was on my mind. And civil liberties on the campus was also on my mind. So I decided I'm going to resign and run with a slate of candidates. So I asked a few people I knew. We doubled the electorate. And I was our highest vote getter at about 45%. And that made us realize there's something cooking down there in the student body. So SLATE became the replacement of TASK. SLATE became a campus political party in the very end of 56 or early 57. We had a meeting, about 100 students came. I was elected chairman, and we were off and running. So that's my beginnings at Berkeley, as SLATE was a vital force in the early days of the student movement.
How long did SLATE last? Because when I got there in '64 and promptly got arrested in the free speech movement, we heard about SLATE, and I don't know if it was still active or not. Everybody was out there, from Students for Democratic Society, the Du Bois clubs, right-wing groups, civil liberties groups. It was quite a scene. And SLATE was a word I heard a lot, but I never knew a lot about it.
It was waning. It still was alive, but its best days were over. I think in '62, SLATE elected the student body president. So it reached a peak in the early '60s, and then free speech movement kind of took over everything. Really, it was such an incredible force. But SLATE was copied all over the country. There were campus political parties popping up all over the country. We were on the phone with people, or on the West Coast, we actually traveled. SLATE leaders visited a number of campuses where people replicated or tried to replicate what we were doing. Then in '60, we had a summer conference on civil liberties and other issues. It was a multi-issue conference, and the research director of the Old Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee was there. So he was leaving the campgrounds to go visit someone. He said a guy named Saul Alinksy, who was a key guy in the early development of Cesar Chavez. And you mind if I tag along? So I wanted to tag along because I'd been canned from a job in New York, where I'd been at graduate school for a year at Columbia, and then gotten a job organizing tenants on the Lower East Side. I'd gotten canned as a little Alinksy. I said, who the hell is this guy? So I tagged along with Hank, met Alinksy. That's how I got in touch with him. As you know, I later went to work for him. But then back to Berkeley. And the next year, our conference was on the sit-ins and development of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Chuck McDew was the chairman. He came out, spoke at our conference, stayed at my place. And before he went home, he asked me to become the SNCC rep in the Bay Area. So I was honored and I quit my job and went to work for SNCC. And I was on the SNCC staff for 4 years. I was at the meeting that voted whites out of the organization. SNCC was a shadow of its peak self, but I'd hung in there to the end, at least for whites. And it was a fabulous experience. I mean, SNCC was an extraordinary combination of talents and people with wonderful spirits. And it's probably the most profound experience of my life. I was in Mississippi in the summer of '63, which is the year before the big summer project. But most of the time I was out here in the West organizing support work. We recruited volunteers, raised money, did political education on behalf of SNCC. And what was our fourth activity?
Mike, let me jump in here. And did you overlap with a fellow named Terry Cannon, who was later?
Yeah, Terry was editor of of a newspaper called The Movement.
Right. And it was a SNCC newsletter initially. It became an organizer's paper that he was the editor of, and then Joe Blum.
That's right.
That was it was one of the most wonderful papers. I have a whole set still.
I do too. I do too. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to get rid. I'm trying to find the right place to give things. So if you have an idea of who I should donate an almost complete archive of the movement, let me know. Yeah,
well,
the
we'll
movement
talk about that because DePaul University is starting to have a lot of stuff. They have the Rising Up Angry stuff.
oh,
A lot of things. It'd be good. Anyhow, so you're involved with SNCC, and you did go to the South, because I remember looking, I still have one of my favorite books ever, is a book of photography called The Movement, and Danny Lyon took a lot of the pictures. Yeah. And there is a picture of you with Bob Moses, who you might want to share a little bit about, knocking on the door in Mississippi.
Yeah, that's in Ruleville, Mississippi, which is the legendary Fannie Lou Hamer's hometown. And we're talking to an elderly woman sitting on a porch there. And the other person in that photo is Margaret, senior moment. Her last name is Martha Prescott. Martha and I are still in touch. Wonderful woman. She was at Ann Arbor, University of Michigan in those days. So she had come down, and we were all based in Greenwood in the Delta. And I got picked up. There was another white guy and I. We were the experimental whites in the Delta. Bob Moses initially resisted our being there because the presence of whites had increased violence against black people. But he was prevailed upon by the local project director and by the national director, Jim Foreman, and he reluctantly agreed to our being there. Well, sure enough, we weren't there more than maybe a week or 10 days. We got picked up by the cops and were taken to the jailhouse, and we're standing at the booking desk, and all we can hear is the buzz of this arresting cop and the chief, and it goes on for 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and we were really scared. He yelled up to the second floor, "Got me some nigga lovers here, boys." And we thought, well, we're really going to get a bad beating when we get thrown in that jail. Well, this cop came out, get back in the car, he tells us. Now what? He starts driving into the black community and points out, "You see that school? We built that." Now he's saying niggas. So he's not at the worst racist level of speaking of black people. And then he shows us a new park and playground. And then he drops us at the SNCC office. And we went, what the heck's going on? So we walked in, and there were about 20, 30 people there laughing and cheering. What's so funny? Well, Sam Block, the project director, called the chief. "Chief, don't mess with those boys. They know the governor of California." Total bluff. But it saved our butts, I'll tell you. So then I went back to the Bay Area, and it happened just coincidentally. We rented a SNCC office in a Presbyterian church headquarters. It was the office of the Department of Urban Work. And in it were two Presbyterians who had been to an Alinksy 10-day workshop and were committed to bringing Alinksy to the San Francisco Bay Area. So I became friendly with them, and we all were involved in Bay Area local anti-urban renewal work. In those days, urban renewal was called Negro removal. And,
or poor people removal in the case of Uptown in Chicago.
Yeah, right. Depending where you were, it was black people or brown people or poor white people. But it sought to reclaim lower income housing areas in the central city for fancy hotels and convention centers and expensive housing. So I went to these Presbyterians and their Episcopal counterpart organized a 10-day workshop with Alinksy, probably in 65. And I went to that. And maybe it could have been late 64. And Alinksy's stuff answered a lot of questions that I had on my mind based on what I was doing in these anti-urban renewal fights, and also problems that were emerging in SNCC. As you probably remember, in 64, there was a big Mississippi Summer Project. Roughly 800 students and young people, plus another couple of hundred lawyers, doctors, various kinds of building tradespeople went to Mississippi for the Mississippi Summer Project. And the idea was the eyes of the North would come to Mississippi and live there for the summer and work with local people. And this would spread the horror of Mississippi and the Deep South to the rest of the country, which it did. And out of that summer, there was a challenge at the Democratic National Convention to the seating of the racist delegation at the Chicago Convention. And we all thought we were going to win that. Yeah. We really thought we had the votes in the Credentials Committee, which was the first hurdle that had to be crossed. And we thought if we can get a minority report out of the Credentials Committee onto the convention floor, once it's out there in the open on the convention floor, it's going to pass because national TV is going to be there and so on and so on. Well, we were unprepared for Lyndon Johnson's ability to peel away votes. He very personal. He knew exactly what to talk about with whom. Someone who was on the committee from Idaho, a dam that was going to be built in Idaho was now in jeopardy. Someone who was in the Bay Area, well, her husband, who was up for federal district court judgeship, that appointment was now in jeopardy. And Johnson just peeled away the votes. Congresswoman Edith Green, who was our biggest ally, Congresswoman from Oregon, she told us, she said, I can't hold on to the votes. And that led to a bitter reaction in SNCC. SNCC was not prepared for that. We didn't understand it.
We were talking about the Mississippi Freedom Delegation to the Democratic Convention and what was going on with SNCC. So, Mike, take it away. Tell us a little bit about what was happening.
Well, as you know, there was a delegation from Mississippi, almost all black, but Ed King was the white minister at Tougaloo, a black college in the South. He was co-chair maybe with Aaron Henry. Aaron Henry was the state president of the NAACP. And I think almost all of us in SNCC thought we were going to unseat the racist so-called regulars. And we were unprepared for Lyndon Johnson's ability to peel away votes with threats to appointments to judgeships, threats to the building of a dam in Idaho. He had the right tool for the right person. And the effect of losing that was deep in SNCC. The disillusionment with the system was bitter. Years later, probably maybe in the 2010s or even in the early, it wasn't too long before he died, really, that Bob Moses and I had a reminiscent conversation about that. And I asked Bob, what would you have done with the benefit of hindsight? And he said, well, I would have gotten us all together, gone away on a retreat, and stayed as long as it took to recreate the sense of being a band of sisters and brothers, a circle of trust. Because prior to that, there had been serious disagreements in SNCC. But when they reached their peak in these 5, 6, 7-day staff retreats, someone would break into song, freedom songs, and we'd get in a circle, cross our arms, hold the person to our right and left and kind of rock back and forth, singing freedom songs. And it restored that sense of community among us. After that challenge, defeat, we couldn't restore that. Ideology inserted itself into SNCC, and ideological differences became more important than the unity necessary really to build people power at the base. And I could see it before my eyes. It was a tragic period, tragic decline. But I met Bob in Greenwood when I was there because he was based in Greenwood. And he's the legendary figure of the Deep South civil rights movement. And really, he deserves to be as well known as Martin Luther King, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, he was really inspirational. I mean, to all of us, he says the question you have to ask yourself, he was just slow and just beautiful.
That's right. Soft-spoken, mostly listened, inserted himself at the critical moment with the right point or question. Fabulous, a wonderful, wonderful human being. Years later, I worked with him on the algebra project. He invented a whole new way of teaching algebra to inner city kids that is a whole separate story for maybe another time. But so I was in SNCC as the decline was taking place. And in 1965, I think it was, these Presbyterian and Episcopalian clergy people in the Bay Area held a 10-day conference with Saul Alinksy. And they invited me, and I went. And I thought Alinksy had answers to a whole lot of questions that were going on in my head. And I went to a second one in the next year, and he just seemed on target on a whole lot of things to me. So maybe it was September 1966, Alinksy said to me, "My guy in Kansas City, Missouri is in trouble. I need someone to replace him. I want you to be there beginning of January next year." Whoa. So I knew it was time for me to leave SNCC, and I did. And I actually was at the meeting that voted the whites out, but I was already on my way to work for Alinksy. So I went to Kansas City, Missouri, and I was in over my head. My last 6 months in Kansas City, I was taking Darvon. It's a very potent anti-headache, depressant pill. And the doctor wouldn't even prescribe it until I guaranteed him that I would be out of Kansas City at the end of 6 months because the contract ended. Okay. Well, I was also in touch with people in the Mission District where I'd been working with the local Latino community on an anti-urban renewal effort. And they raised some money and wanted me to come to work for them. So I said, well, I'm not sure organizer is what I'm meant to be. Well, come and help us organize a founding meeting. In those days, these Alinksy tradition organizations had big founding conventions, and they tried to get everybody in the community there, whether they were on the left or center or even sort of ideologically white homeowner groups, all came together in a community convention, which adopted program, elected leadership, and adopted a constitution and bylaws. So I agreed I'd help them have a founding meeting, and it went fabulously well. So I was off and running. I stayed working in the mission. We had a terrific organization, Mission Coalition organization, about which I wrote a book called An Organizer's Tale, which I'm, as a matter of fact, in the process of editing. So if people want to see the new edition, just let me know. And that really launched me on becoming a full-time community organizer. And it was a great experience in the mission. We had, at our peak, we had about 1,200 delegates and alternates at a community conventions whose delegations ranged from the Maoist Progressive Labor Party influenced Mission Tenants Union to pretty conservative Mission Merchants Association, and everything in between: churches, block clubs, tenant associations, youth groups, you name it. They were in Mission Coalition. And we beat the mayor on control of the Model Cities program, which we feared was urban renewal with another name. But
let me jump in here. And, you went on, I don't know how much after your work in the mission, but you went on to set up this organizer training center. And you've talked to a lot of people about organizing and what it means to be an organizer and how to understand and think about organizing. Tell us a little bit about your organizer training center and the work you did. And then toward the end, I want to ask you a few questions about some of your books. But I'd love to hear the work that you did in the organizer training center and kind of what that the Alinksy experience taught you and how you continued that or how you changed it. I just want to throw in quickly where I met Alinksy, and it was in the Carmel Highlands.
That's where his summer home was.
Yeah, so I met him there and we talked and all that. And he was an older guy then, and but he was a big influence. His book Reveille for Radicals was something we all read.
Yeah,
and, Tell us about what happened then with you.
Well, Alinksy had really, the ideas are pretty straightforward. When you're organized, people power versus money power, that's the central conflict in the country. And if you want to have a small d democracy, then people power has to be the dominant force. Money has to be subsumed. Money has to be accountable to people, not the other way around. And how do you get people power? You have to organize people. Who do you organize in an oppressed or even maybe a working class community where people aren't as oppressed as a poor Black community, but they have a whole lot of issues? You find out what people care most about, and you bring them together around those things they care most about in a multi-issue organization that is based on the principle of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. You want a stop sign at this corner? All right, we'll work with your block club to get that. The Mission Merchants wanted to get the pawn shops off Mission Street. All right, we'll work with the Mission Merchants to get that. Young people and after the summer adults want to get employed, the Latino particular people, and we're going to do direct action at bakeries and soda pop companies based in the mission. All right, we'll organize people to do direct action for jobs. And because we've helped the Mission Merchants, when the mayor tried to get them to quit MCO, the president, a guy who owned a donut shop on Mission Street, you may remember it, Hunt's Donut Shop, 19th and Mission, Frank Hunt. Hunt told the mayor, well, Mr. Mayor, when I needed to get the pawn shops off Mission Street and stop the girly pornographic movies from opening there, it was those folks that helped me, and I'm not walking out on them now. He got the same response from the pastor at St. Peter's Catholic Church because we had organized tenants who were threatened with eviction and unemployed people who got jobs. And so Father Jim Casey said to the mayor, I'm not walking out. I'm not leaving MCO. Well, so that's how we won. We won veto power over what Model Cities was going to be. And this idea of multi-issue, multi-constituency, low to moderate, low to middle income, you want to get as many people as possible around a core set of democratic values under the same tent. And you make compromises among one another if you have to, so that you can be united in the face of the larger adversaries you have to change. And we did that. We did that successfully. And people started hearing about the MCO work. So I decided I would start a training center. And MCO was a fusion, really, of Alinksy and some of the more, what do I want to say, risky ideas of SNCC. And at the peak, we had Organized Training Center had contracts with about 10 or 11 groups around the country, ranging from rural Nebraska and Omaha to Denver to Tucson to Portland, Oregon, and then a number in California. And I did that for a number of years, maybe a dozen or more, maybe more. And then by the end of that experience, I was pretty confident of myself as a community organizer. And then in the mid 70s, we started a statewide thing called Citizens Action League. And in those days, there was a feeling that we can expand more rapidly. We don't need this carefully put together, tight, neighborhood-based geographic organization. We can move more quickly with the pace of a movement. And so we had a statewide Citizens Action League, which won Lifeline utility rates in California and had some other victories, more local in character, on a wide range of issues. So I did that kind of work up until about 79, I think. Along the way, I had met a Presbyterian evangelical by the name of Robert Linthicum, minister. And I learned that theological conservatism was not necessarily political conservatism. I mean, he was a really quite radical guy in the best sense of radical, going to the root of matters. And he asked me to come and do a workshop under his auspices in LA, which I did. And there was a woman there by the name of Marilyn Stransky. And she was, I couldn't get more than a paragraph out of my mouth, and her arm would pop up with a question. But as she would tell you, were she here, in the second day, I had a conversion experience. So she, at the end of this workshop, collared Linthicum and said, we've got to bring the message of this stuff to our strand of Christianity. And they wanted to hire me. And I said, how are you going to explain a non-religious Jew to this Pentecostal evangelical holiness world? And Marilyn said, you let us worry about that. And so we raised money, they hired me, and I worked in that world for about 9, almost 10 years. It was an extraordinary experience. And it was not the results we hoped for, but we did shift some congregations in local places to join these already existing Alinksy tradition organizations. Alinksy by that time was dead. And we got a few people out of those seminaries who pursued careers as organizers. So it was an extraordinary experience meeting evangelical and Pentecostal leaders. The guy who became co-chair of San Francisco Organizing Project, Reverend Aurelius Walker, pastored a church in the Hunters Point community, a low-income Black community in San Francisco, True Hope Church of God in Christ. And he was Pentecostal. And he started his church going as a street ministry. He was working a regular job. I think he was a postal worker. And off hours, he was on the street talking to pimps and prostitutes and people who were the excluded and gathering them in house meetings, prayer meetings. And then he got enough of those. They rented a storefront. When I met him, True Hope Church of God in Christ had 1,000 members, which he had built from nothing. Extraordinary human being. So he was, there's a great story. Fred Kotler, who was a Jewish secular guy and a leader in the janitors union, Fred Kotler and this minister, Aurelius Walker, were co-chairs of a campaign we had to reform the utility company rate structure. And Walker said, when he spoke outside of PG&E at a rally, he said, if you had told me a year ago that I would be standing here at a mass rally as the co-speaker with a Jewish secular labor organizer, I'd have told you were crazy. But that's who he had become. So I had endlessly interesting experiences and met endlessly interesting people.
You know, Mike Miller, we're going to run out of time. So I got a couple of things I want to do this before we probably invite you to come on again.
Oh, okay.
You've written a number of books. You have People Power, the community organizing tradition of Saul Alinksy. You have Community Organizing, an introduction and overview, a community organizer's tale. But one that caught my attention was the student movement and Saul Alinksy, an alliance that never happened. Can you say a couple things about that book?
Well, I thought I really wanted to bring these two forces together. And I started doing that at Berkeley. I got Alinksy to come to Cal and speak on campus the summer of either 60 or 61. And the question kept arising, what's your ideology? And Alinksy would say, well, I'm a small d Democrat. I believe in people power. I believe in the right of people to determine their own destinies. Well, that wasn't enough. And this question, what's your ideology, I think plagued and undermined the student movement. Because when you ask people, well, what do you mean by ideology? They didn't have a very good definition beyond your value structure and an analysis of power. Well, Alinksy had both of those. He had a broad value structure, democratic values, equality, self-determination, free speech, sense of community, mutual respect. He had a core value system, and he sure understood how power worked. Now, and he wanted to build democratic power. Well, that wasn't enough. And Alinksy got impatient. That was the other problem. Alinksy got impatient with young people, and it prevented him being able to really speak with them. And then as IAF, after Alinksy died and Ed Chambers became the director, they were looking at the question, what do we have to do to keep these groups that we put together from being like water in the palm of your hand? And they came to the conclusion they had to be more rooted in religious congregations. And that did, in fact, lead to the creation of more permanent organizations. But it also conservatized organizing. It became more cautious, and that's what its problem is today. To me, it builds good, strong local organizations, but they're like having a brick house in a growing desert where there's less and less water available. We're in the desert now, and we got to figure out a way to get out of it.
Speaking of the desert, since we're going to run out of time, what are your thoughts, or what would you tell young organizers or other people about what they might ought to do today? What we need to do?
Get yourself into workplaces and neighborhoods. Spend a year living there and listening and developing relationships of trust. When you've done that, then you're ready to begin to learn to be an organizer. And then you've got to master a set of skills and take seriously the idea of being multi-issue. And that people need to experience victory if you want to shift them from alienation and feeling powerless to participation. We've got to figure out how to take these great turnouts at No King's Day and turn them into ongoing, permanent, multi-issue structures in local neighborhoods and into member-based labor union locals at workplaces. Those are the two keys. If we can do that, we can turn the country around. If not, I'm very pessimistic.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you're pessimistic, because you're still an inspiration to me. And there's a million things to talk about still, like in the future, the legacy of Alinksy, how labor organizing and community organizing could work together, how we deal with the conservatism of some of Alinsky's groups and other groups. There's a lot to talk about, but we'll do it another time. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in today to listen to this interview or to view it with my friend Mike Miller out on the West Coast. I want to encourage people to check out last week's show where we had Joe Schweiderman talking about transportation, State Representative Kelly Cassidy talking about a trans bill in the Illinois State Legislature, and we had Stephanie Bradford talking about women boxers mostly.
And let me get one more thing in, Mike. Go to www.organizedtrainingcenter.com, and you can see a list of articles I've written and books and all. You learn more about my work.
It's a great website. It'll also be listed on the information about the show.